My name is Jennifer Gray Thompson, and I am the CEO of After the Fire. Welcome to the podcast, How to Disaster: Recover, Rebuild, and Reimagine. In this podcast, we bring you the very best practices, best hearts, and great ideas from other disaster-affected communities. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to the podcast, How to Disaster. Today, I am so pleased to bring you Marko Bey, Executive Director of Lomakatsi Restoration Project, as well as Belinda Brown, the Tribal Partnership Director for Lomakatsi. I asked them to come on today because the work they've been doing over the past 25 years is really important, and it can be scaled elsewhere, and you can also use them as a resource. I'm so pleased to welcome them here today with us on the podcast, How to Disaster. Once again, welcome to the podcast, Marko Bey and Belinda Brown. I'd like to start today by having Marko Bey tell us a little bit about his background, and then I'd like to have Belinda tell us about her background and how each of you came to do this work. Welcome.
So appreciate the opportunity to come on and share After the Fire and all the great work of Rebuild North Bay Foundation. My name's Marko Bey. I'm Executive Director of Lomakatsi Restoration Project. I'm involved in natural resources and restoration work since 1987. Started out in an era, the reforestation era, which was the product of the big tree logging, industrial forestry industry, where clear cutting was a pretty big practice back then on public lands as well as private lands. So complete overstory removal of trees, and then the replanting of single species that are now these plantations that are actually burning really hot is kind of the origin. And just looking over the years in restoration work across multiple states, ecological restoration is the practice of restoring and renewing degraded landscapes. So that work that have been impacted entails everything from aquatic habitat work to forest resiliency work, to working in systems across the spectrum. So in 1995, after working for 8 years in the private sector in the reforestation and forestry service industry, I helped to found Lomakatsi Restoration Project, really to build a bridge between hands-off approach to ecosystems and complete industrial model of forestry. So the goal is to restore the land, create jobs, create resilient systems, and create thriving communities. That's been our work the last 26 years, and have a lot of background in on-the-ground work as an implementer, a sawyer, a person applying fire, and over the last several years, really since 2007, I've been more in a programmatic administrative role, and was really sorry to leave the woods on a full-time basis. But a lot of time on the ground, a lot of time spent restoring fire-adapted systems and working with communities. So that's a little bit about my background and engaging with multiple partners across many spectrums to get this good collaborative work done. It's going to take all of us.
Absolutely. And so, Belinda, can you introduce yourself to our listeners and talk about how you came to do this work and how long you've been doing it?
Thank you for that. Yes, my name is Belinda Brown. I'm a member of the co-selected band of the Ajumawi Otsage Nation, otherwise known as the Pit River Tribe. And I've been involved in this work since 1988. I came along in the reforestation restoration era and had a company from 1988 till 1995. So I was just finishing up my business as Marko was starting his. And so my work has entailed Alaska, Oregon, and Washington, different businesses. My background, though, is health and human services. And so working with tribes in Oregon, California, and Alaska, and bringing those tribal interests and those tribal voices to the forefront in policy and legislation, and the ways that we interact in intergovernmental affairs and consultation, the government to government consultation that sovereign nations have with the agencies. And so since 2000, with Executive Order 13175 in government to government consultation under the era of President Clinton, tribes have been given that opportunity to actually co-manage, co-invest, and lead in restoration of their Aboriginal tribal lands. 2012, as I was on tribal council and leading California tribes in our water wars, we invited Lomakatsi to help us to develop our workforce capacity, because we can have all the money in the world and we have to have a trained workforce to be able to put it on the ground. So I came to Lomakatsi 5 years ago, worked as a consultant contractor, and then came on as an employee to continue to promote this work and to reach out to the regional tribes, because we know that they are the first best stewards of the land, and they continue to be the first best stewards of the land. Our commission as tribal people is to take care of the land and the water and the natural resources. So Lomakatsi has been actually a vehicle and a platform to elevate our tribal voices, to unite our tribal sovereign nations, and to respond where we're asked and invited to come help. And for that, I'm just very grateful. Lomakatsi is a word, a Hopi word that means life and balance. And everything that we do in Lomakatsi is trying to bring that balance back and politically really bring all sides together. It's going to be all hands on deck for this work. And we always try to hit that sweet spot of the radical middle so that we can build common ground and we can build those partnerships strong, and we can come in one voice and solution focused to the problems and the issues and the challenges that we face.
I just want you to know, Belinda, that I'm totally going to steal the term radical middle, because that's where I'm such a devote. I love that term, and I so believe in that sweet spot, and I believe we're capable of it despite all the rhetoric that somehow we can't. Like, I just don't buy it. So thank you. So I'd like to turn it back to you now, Marko, to talk more about the issue and the challenges and the critical importance of collaboration, because that's often really the hardest part about doing this work. Is people become so siloed or so married or so invested in their own piece of how to attend to mitigation and post-disaster, that it's hard with bandwidth sometimes to look up and say, I want to sit at the table with people who you might consider strange bedfellows, but actually we are all in this together. So talk about that road to get that done and how important it is.
Sure. So thinking back to, the origin of the need for collaboration around forestry issues, before we were having these massive mega fires, and, there's always been large fires. When I moved to Oregon in 1987, there was the 1987 fires, which were really large across Northern California and Southern Oregon. So we've had large fires. There's always that need for interagency collaboration, between federal and state agencies. But really on the forestry issues, there was a period of complete polarization, the table was not being attended by either side. So things were shut down. There were lawsuits. There were, a lot of natural resource related issues. So there was kind of a need for collaboration, a need to bring parties together. And then that movement really was born of forest collaboratives in the early 90s in Southern Oregon with the Applegate Partnership. So really trying to have a conversation with industry, with federal agencies, tribes, non-government organizations, community leaders. But as the wildfire issue has accelerated, a lot of the roots and models that we laid down have been beneficial to this issue that we're dealing with, these mega fires. So the need to bring all these parties together to find that middle, as Belinda says, is really centered around common values and zones of agreement. And those zones of agreement are developed, around that we all care about this landscape. we all care about the communities that are couched within this landscape, and we care about the ecosystem services, the habitat. So how do we come together to bring these joint skills? So one example, I could share some examples, but the Ashland Forest Resiliency Stewardship Project is one where the community had input on a community alternative. We wanted to address the wildfire issue, and we wanted to address the ecosystem resilience issue. And the mechanisms it wasn't the time when it was first rolled out. It was going to be a timber sale to reduce fire hazard. It was going to remove some of the largest trees that are the most fire resilient trees. And those trees are going to be, the revenue from those trees were going to help pay for some of the work. So with Stewardship Authority, which is what we operate under quite a bit in our all lands mitigation and restoration work, came about in the late 90s, early 2000s. And, you know, we had a hand in promoting that authority. And that authority it's collaborative in nature. And it's a great tool for communities considering wildfire mitigation and a holistic approach. So we were able to utilize a stewardship agreement model, bring different players to the table. There's actually folks that are signed on the agreement and then auxiliary partners that support the overall initiative. So through that work, we've been able to, you know, bring opposing sides together, lean on the skills of the people who built the roads, the people who know how to manage logging systems, but use that as an ecological forestry approach. So we have industry at the table. We have municipal fire departments in some of our projects. We have federal agencies, and through Belinda's work, we have tribal partners. And each of those parties, the public and private and tribal partnerships, bring a really important piece, overlapping skills, resources, a different way of viewing you know, the issues we're dealing with. And we've just continued to become a family and strengthen that work. I mean, not everybody's on board. You're always going to have folks that have a really important perspective, but for the most part, there are zones of agreement that we need to treat these forests. They're overly dense. Through industrial forestry, they've been heavily impacted in the past. We have a lot of ingrowth. We have a real need to address the health of these ecosystems and these forests, and also the threats to communities. And the only way to get there is through a collaborative conversation and through memorandums of understanding, through people anteing up. Because at this point, we saw with the fires of 2020, we have to come together. And we've been laying the brickwork for this for many years through smaller projects, and now we're scaling up across our basins to achieve a landscape scale, you know, a creative way of thinking, using best science, using practice and capacity to get this really important work done. Where do we invest and how do we get there? So collaboration is really the center core of how we're going to get this work done.
Thank you so much for that. I truly believe that we have to treat it as an emergency, as a crisis, and we have to look at it like war. Like, we need to come together, and, you know, it doesn't matter. I don't care if you're a Democrat, you're a Republican, you're an independent. It doesn't matter. Your politics don't matter to me. It's your willingness to lean all the way into it in order to come out the other side. And so with that, I would actually like to turn it back to Belinda to talk about specifically what have the challenges been in getting people from all sectors to understand what I think you believe, and I know that we believe, which is that tribal leaders and tribal leadership actually need to be not invited to the table, but at the center of the table, need to be setting the table, that we need to look back in order to leap forward ecologically. And this will help in areas of health and human services tremendously, because equity is a huge issue in disaster. And we know that the more disasters we have, that the greater the inequities. And nothing gave us more evidence than that than COVID, but COVID was showing us what wildfires and other disasters already had been. So can you talk about your perspective and your work there and why it's so important? And I'm sorry that my text message just went off. Go ahead.
Yes. Tribal leadership in this arena is a crucial component as the first best stewards of the land, and going back a little bit in the history of active removal, active genocide on our people, removing us as the first best stewards in removing that Aboriginal fire, that land management tool that was used for time immemorial. and then discrediting our elders and our Aboriginal knowledge of what best to do with the land when public agencies came about, when the Forest Service came about, when the BLM came about, and that trust responsibility was turned over to them to be the experts of the land. And now we know that isn't so. So in a really kind, gentle way, the Aboriginal people get the giant I Told You So award in how land management and how Aboriginal knowledge should be at the forefront of everything that we do. We state that the land wasn't just a vast wildland, it was very well cared for. It was our home, our pharmacy, our grocery store, our Home Depot. It was everything. So a lot of thought and, again, time immemorial practices kept that land base solid. And now in policy, in government, in tribal government, Executive Order 13175 that wasn't implemented until 2000, it's all new. And how we use these tools in government and in government to government consultation is a process, a learning process, and it's a steep learning curve because Native American history wasn't taught in the public school systems. We are America's family secret. In Oregon, there's 9 federally recognized tribes. In California, there is 109 federally recognized tribes, and that's not even counting the non-federally recognized tribes. In the United States, there's 567 federally recognized tribes, and they're sovereign nations, nation within a nation. So they actually have the ability to forge policy. And it's all the tools of the trade of how to work with tribes. And so you have, for instance, a tribal liaison position in FEMA, a tribal liaison position in the BLM, and a tribal liaison position in the Forest Service. So across all these jurisdictions and all these departments, you have tribal liaisons. And if you look at a tribal liaison job description, they may all be different. That's part of the standardized protocols and policies and procedures that we need to let's standardize some of this. And then our emergency response across jurisdictions and communications and mutual aid agreements. And California has an amazing agreement, and I'm going to say it here, the California Master Cooperative Wildland Fire Management and Stafford Act Response Agreement. Now we have that agreement. It's like a MOU or a MOA. We need to know how to use it. And we need relevant technical assistance sometimes in tribal communities and that communication across those jurisdictional boundaries to be able to formalize those mutual aid agreements that we need. So basically we need to have a plan in place and we need to practice these incidents before they ever occur. Preparation is crucial in this. So the prevention, response, recovery, mitigation, all is in a whole community response.
I just want to make sure that because there was a little bit of distortion there, that the MOA is, so are you saying that there are specific ones that you think are best practices that can be applied into a more uniform implementation of how to do this technical assistance, how to work with tribes? And where would our listeners find that specifically? Because one of our goals with this podcast is that people don't continue to reinvent the process of recovery, and of mitigation and preparation. Like there's no need to reinvent it if parts of it already exist and you have the opportunity to adapt and improve. So is that what you're saying? I just want to make sure I understood.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Tools are there. Sometimes we don't know all the tools of the trade, like the Master Stewardship Agreement. And for California, and I'll say it again, they have the California Master Cooperative Wildland Fire Management and Stafford Act Response Agreement. It covers years 2018 to 2023. So you're currently in that agreement. Maybe some people don't know about that agreement, but it really crosses those jurisdictional boundaries. And a huge challenge for prevention, response, recovery, mitigation, and that whole community response is jurisdiction. Who's going to pay for the damages? So it boils down to money, and it boils down to how are we going to share that? How are we going to have a mutual aid agreement in place before this disaster happens? Because we know it's going to happen. We know we're going to have wildfires this year. And then being trained in the fundamental standardized protocols to be able to respond. For the pandemic, we've been doing that. We're running concurrent emergency response right now with the fires, wildland fires, and with the pandemic. And there are standardized fundamental protocols that we all should be trained in to be able to have the tools in our communities to be able to respond. And that's the local communities that need to be trained, and we have to have the communication protocols. We have to have the ability to communicate across all jurisdictions, and hopefully have, again, those mutual aid agreements in place before that time of crisis comes, so that we all know what we're supposed to be doing and that we can respond in a proper manner. Yeah, government to government, I think it's really important that we invite the tribes and that we include them every step of the way, and actually lean on the leadership of that sovereign nation to nation agreement and ability to consult with Washington, D.C. if we need to move something on the local level, community level, state level.
Thank you so much for that. It's wonderful to see people like you who are on the front lines of doing this work, and I'm hoping that that people come to you for a consultation even more in other parts of the country, even more than they have. To say, how are we going to do this? What are the best practices? What are the federal and state laws we need to be aware of? And so I just really want to tell you how much I admire your depth of knowledge and experience and dedication to it, because it's desperately needed. And I'd actually like to turn it back to Marko at this point to talk about really a lot of what we're talking about with Belinda is, how to make sure that the tribal leaders are at the center of the table. You can invite them. I want them at the center. I want them setting the table and leading the way. But, when you're talking about collaboration, that involves the private sector. And I think that one of the things that we've seen happen in disaster is people don't know how to engage the private sector in a way that is, or they struggle with it, that is that's helpful, that can use their talent, that's more than traditional philanthropy, which is, can you write us a check? Instead, yes, write us a check, but also if you have specialized knowledge of systems, like the grocery industry has very specialized knowledge, it's really actually helpful in disaster, so that they are invited to the table. But can you talk about your work, Marko, in that area, some of the challenges and opportunities?
Well, before I answer that private sector is really broad. So I just want to be sure I'm getting to your question. So
I'm talking about the logging industry. I'm talking about everything from, like on our board, we have Henrysel, who has Hansel Auto Group, and he has been in this fight with us for 4 years. And he called the city manager of Santa Rosa during our wildfires, and he said, I'm happy to write a check, but what I really want to do is also help. And so he's been really instrumental in our advocacy, in how we tap into other areas of philanthropy, but also he's been a good coach for me in how to navigate the world of nonprofits in a way that is sort of business minded in that sense. A lot of the private sector is very fearful of the term disaster capitalism, which they should be, because there's a whole side of that that's terrible. But there's also the side of it is lending your knowledge, influence, experience, and your capital into the systemic moment that we're in, which is responding to mega fires and then trying to mitigate them at the same time. So when I'm talking about private sector, I'm talking about business specifically.
Okay. Well, I guess I could speak on what the private sector that I engage with. And we have a really unique model through our collaborative forest restoration and fuels mitigation work. So just to recap, we're working across thousands of acres. We're setting the stage for good fire on the ground. And that's a hard one for people to digest. So we need to reduce the density to more historic conditions. We need to do our thinning work in an ecological manner, and then set the structure of the forest that when we return fire through prescribed burning, it burns at low intensity and does its job. Or if fire were to come back from natural ignition or human ignition outside of prescribed burning, that it would burn at low intensity. So in order to get this work done, Lomakatsi is a non-government organization. We're a convener. We raise dollars. We have a whole programmatic team that are raising funds, acquiring federal, state, tribal, and private philanthropic resources to get this very expensive work done that costs anywhere from $1,000 to $2,500 an acre to do mitigation, fuels reduction type work. So as the convener and as a partner with other nonprofits and federal agencies, tribes, with these established agreements that we have for large-scale, long-term projects, we're able to layer in workforce development, youth training and employment, all these other social and economic elements to the restorative work. But the private sector, we really depend on in the service industry of forestry and timber. They're not in the business of raising money. They're in the business of doing work. We're in the business of doing a lot of work too, but our job is to bolster and to continue to gird up their capacity and actually incubate additional businesses. And that's a lot of the work Lomakatsi does and a lot of the work we do in tribal communities. So the private sector is invested. A lot of them in fire suppression. Seasonally, they work on wildfire suppression, but during their fall, winter, and spring, they're doing forestry and mitigation work. So how to keep that workforce employed is really important. So we have service providers in forestry, over 75 in our area in Jackson and Josephine County that we do a lot of our work. And with the boom and bust of the big tree economy going away, these service providers, their job was reforestation. Now, over the last 20 years, we've been transitioning in building the restoration economy and more ecosystem restoration and forest resiliency work. So we want to continue to hold on to that capacity, some that have been in business 40 years, through these large stewardship agreements and cooperative agreements that only nonprofits, tribes, or municipalities can enter into. We are business investors, we're partners, we're bringing matching funds to the table. We're raising money to get this work done, but we need to have that muscle and that established local business and capacity to do the work. We have to maintain those businesses. So we've been successful in awarding a lot of those dollars to that private sector in forestry and fuels mitigation work. And organizations like Lomakatsi can do that with our partners, but the fire suppression community has capacity. They're established. So in order to get this work across thousands of acres, we're going to lean on them, and we're going to need to keep them in business. We're going to need to make this work viable. But at the same time, we see a huge investment from the private sector in wanting to be in the game. So there is definitely skin in the game in this work. And we're proud to support the private sector. Outside of the industry we work in, there's also, private sector folks that care about their community. They want to put some sweat equity in the game. They want to have some strategic thinking around how we're going to do this because it benefits them and the whole community. So really the model in Oregon and rolled out through Governor Brown's wildfire response effort and the committee that met over the last couple of years is this concept of private and public partnerships. The one thing left out is tribal, because tribes are not private and they're not public. So the way we center that is private, public, and tribal partnerships that all have resources, funds, skills, expertise, and it's going to take that private sector along with our tribal partners, along with the federal agencies, to get this huge lift of millions of acres that are prone to fire, prone to create the experience that we saw last summer and we've seen over the last decade. It's going to take all hands on deck, co-investment, and folks at the table to creatively think how to do this. Insurance companies, utility companies, there's equations in development on how to get this very expensive work done. It's way more expensive to suppress fire. We know that the checkbook is relatively open there and it's very costly, but the mitigation, although it's expensive in the end, it's going to be cost savings, all of us.
And just to be
Private
clear,
sector,
for people who don't know, it costs the federal government about $6 to respond to respond to a disaster. For every $1 it costs to mitigate or prevent a disaster. So it really is, if you only care about the economy, it still is within your interest to do this work. I just wanted to clarify for people who didn't understand.
thank you for that.
Having thought leaders in this area, every time I discover another one, I feel like I found a gem, and I have more hope, and I have more energy for it. And so yes, I think that was wonderful, and how you address, well, there is an economy to be had, and there is, skin in the game is really important, and beyond just the response to, or the freak out because we're having these mega fires, it's the concept of what role do we all have to play, and responsibility to make sure that this gets done. So I'm thrilled.
Yep. So
yeah.
one piece I did leave out, and I talked about the service forestry industry, which is typically the folks that do what we would call non-commercial work. And what we mean by non-commercial is there's no product coming out of the woods that's going to generate revenue like logs or firewood. But that is a huge part of our infrastructure that we need to maintain from the private sector is our mill infrastructure as we process small diameter material. So these byproducts of ecological forestry, the byproducts of our fuel hazard mitigation work. And then through stewardship, we're able to generate commercial logs, and through these partnerships, send those logs to the mill as non-government organizations in partnership with federal and agencies and tribes through stewardship agreements. And then that revenue generated gets put back into more fuels reduction, prescribed fire mitigation work. So we really need to maintain that mill infrastructure. And a lot of it has downsized to small diameter, which are being thinned around the larger trees. So timber industry is going to be a really important player, and has been an important player in this restoration effort, done in an ecological way.
Huge. And for those who haven't seen the documentary, The West is Burning, I highly recommend that you find that on PBS. It went on national, and you can get it on demand. One of the things they talked about was how important it is to have smaller diameter. With the timber industry was initially set up so they would take the largest and oldest and biggest trees. And this is a completely opposite plan. This is for much smaller diameter trees that are crowding the forest and are not. This is a way of commodifying that product so that you can actually afford the expenses of fuel mitigation. So if nothing else, then cost neutral would be fine. We could live with that. Right. Belinda, I'd like to turn back over to you to talk about something that we think about a lot here at After the Fire, and that is, you are a tribal leader, and you are a member of a rural community. And, one of the things that we see in America often these days is, and have for a long time, it's not new, but it certainly has come to a bit of a head, is this idea that rural communities don't care about the land in the way that urban communities actually think that they should care. I think there's a lot of misinformation about how people are attached to the land, and how we should enter into rural communities in order to mitigate or assist them pre and post disaster, because there is this level of sort of earned mistrust. And we have a lot of respect for that coming from California. We go into Oregon, we know that we have to have a very light hand and to absolutely come up as helpers, never heroes, never saviors. We do not lead communities' recoveries for them. We are there to support their community-led and designed recovery. I'd like for you to talk about any strategies that you've learned about how to work with rural communities in a way that's very respectful of, and don't make assumptions about who they are, politically. Don't make assumptions about what their value systems with regard to their attachment or care of the land. I think we've lumped it all in one, and I think we've created a lot of distrust. And tell me if I'm wrong. I'm totally open to that too.
No, thank you for that. That's good observation. Just to be being in the political arena for a long time, rural, and we call these frontier communities. Actually, we have a HRSA designation. We fought for that, so we're frontier. And the low numbers in population is really what keeps us out of the game in many ways. And Rural places don't have the $1 million homes on the hill like some other places have, but they're still our homes. And I think that is not correct that rural people don't care. Rural people very much care about their homes and their safety and their livestock. And unfortunately, Northern California, Shasta, Lassen, Modoc, Siskiyou counties, where our Pitt River tribe resides, Modoc County is 86% public federal land. And so you have more land than you have people. You have more cows than you have people. And I think it's really important. Again, Lomakatsi has helped elevate this and given us a platform to create a political will. And so in government, again, politically, when we have a resolution from Modoc County Board of Supervisors, when we have a resolution from Alter City Council, when we have a resolution from 4 tribal governments in Modoc County, we're going to leverage something. And we have before, appropriations for our hospital. So bringing everybody together, again, that collaborative partnership effort. We work across 2 states. We're putting in for disaster philanthropy preparedness mitigation now to put money down in these states. So when we have 2 states, 2 FEMA regions, U.S. Fish and Wildlife region, 5 counties, 5 tribes coming together, that's political will. And so these rural communities sometimes sit and wait for what Washington, D.C. is going to do. And that sometimes isn't the best solution. So what, again, Lomakatsi helps us do is come together and be solution focused. And so we're putting a project out there, we're putting solutions out there that maybe we haven't even heard from Washington, D.C. yet, but we're going to get funded because we all came together and we are that collaborative. And we have all those resolutions and all that political will and our congressmen and our senators going to bat for us. We're going to leverage what we need because we already won the game locally. And I think that's really important that the community, the local communities always have the answers for what they need. And one of the stories last year that really touched me was that little place, Molalla, Oregon, that their people went out and they fought that fire on their own. So just those farmers and ranchers and community members went out and they held that line and they fought that fire and they saved their community. We need to do more of that because at the end of the day, it is just us. And we need to come up with those solutions that fit our need. And we need to have that leadership and that political will and the ability to come together again, hopefully before the crisis happens. But we need to know what every player on that field is capable of and how we're going to mutually benefit each other.
I think you brought up something really important, and I just want to make sure that everybody really hears this, that you cannot wait for Washington to tell you how it's going to go. Washington's actually waiting often for us to say how it's going to go because in our experience, when we go to DC, we go to FEMA, or we go to our senators, we go to the OMB or whatever agency it is, when we show up regionally and multi-sectored with specific requests that are data-based, because we know our community, we get a tremendous response. And what we hear from them is, thank you. We want this to be multi-county. We want this to be multi-state. It's a big bang for their buck, for their time. You will get better, you will get higher up decision makers. Decisions will be made. And the federal government is always very slow. And it's not a criticism necessarily of them, but there's a lot of reasons why that's true. It's giant, it's huge. But you can go to Washington and tell them, you know, what it is that you want. You can do it by Zoom and tell them exactly what is needed. And so I just want to make sure everybody heard that in the advocacy piece, you have far more power and influence than you may imagine. So if you think, oh, I'm just a county supervisor from like a tiny county with 67,000 people in it. Well, you know what? Team up with 3 other counties, because wildfire doesn't care about your county lines. And, even health and human services issues, they don't care about your county lines. And you can have, inequity anywhere or these wildfire dangers anywhere. So I have to be able to say, I'm like, right on, Belinda, thank you. Makes me so happy. So Belinda, I'm actually going to have Marko also attend to this question, but first I would like you to address it. You know, we are based in Sonoma, and we of course are a very well resourced county. We do have multi-million-dollar homes up in our rural areas, but I get asked this question all the time, which is, why are we allowing people to continue to live in the wildland urban interface? And should those houses, for example, in Paradise, be rebuilt? And I'll be honest, I do not like that question, because and what I say every time is, you know, Paradise was just what was to come. There are 1,000 paradises out there. So why don't we instead invest our money in helping the people who already live in the WUI, which is a lot of the American West, harden their homes, do their land fuel mitigation. Instead, why are we sitting back in judgment and saying, well, you shouldn't even live there anyway? So I'd like to hear your thoughts on that, because I know that for me, I find it a little irritating and disrespectful. And I don't think anybody means it when they're saying that, but they also are assuming that people are not attached to place and home and community. That's my soapbox.
That's difficult. And that's difficult because I'm an Aboriginal person. And so I'm going to try to be careful here and speak a little bit, though, for the animals and the wildlife that don't have a voice. And we kind of took their territory. You know, people kind of moved in on territory that maybe we didn't think it out real good. Maybe we could go rethink some of the planning in how we develop. And now that we know more, maybe we can do better. And so it is our responsibility individually and collectively to take all the good information in that we have now, all the best practices that we have now, and really possibly rethink and redesign what we're doing. And that American dream to some was American nightmare to others. And that's where we need to come back to a base point of reference of where do we go from here? And how do we all get there from here? And so every community with its geographical differences, with people differences, with all the diversity, equity, and inclusion, and that deep thought, and again, that collaborative partnership approach, that whole community approach to where do we go from here, probably needs to be rethought. And we all need to make changes in order to address this climate chaos that we're in. And we got ourselves here. We got ourselves here, and we can get ourselves out, or we can mitigate damages. There's changes that need to be made, and we need to think about the animals. Our elders tell us, think about the fish, the wildlife, the generations that are coming after us. Are we making decisions for those 7 generations that are coming in the future? And I think when we stop and we can get a little bit of that Aboriginal thought process going, we're all going to be possibly gentler with ourselves and maybe a little bit wiser about the decisions that we're making for ourselves and our communities and where we build.
So just in case, I always look at everything as a learning moment. It's probably because my history as a teacher, but so I'm curious then, and then I'll go to Marko in just a second. How would you answer the question so that I can be better when I'm asked repeatedly, why are we allowing people to live in the WUI? People who are already there. That's what I'm really referring to. Like, if they want to restrict new growth into the WUI, I have no issue with that. But it's the matter of the idea, like in floodplains, you know, so they do buyouts. The federal government will do a buyout if it's repeatedly flooded. But I worry about this sort of prescriptive, idea that we should be more prescriptive about exactly where people live in a way that we don't already do. I don't know if I'm making sense in the way that I want to, but I hope that you can hear what I'm saying. I don't know that we can go into the rural American West and tell everybody to move. So what do we do?
Well, I think that conversation needs to happen. And, listen, I think one of the most important things we can do during these times of crisis is really listen to each other and just validate those concerns. And then look at what we can do to stay solution focused, because we can be at odds or we can disagree. But like we say, these wildfires know no jurisdictions. The pandemic knows no jurisdictions or boundaries. Critters, wildlife, fish, they know no jurisdictions or boundaries. So what is the best answer for those individuals and communities? Well, obviously you want to prevent. So the defensible space program, I mean, we can help everyone. We can make it more affordable. We can get together as communities and in our rural frontier communities, it's something that we can share. A little community where I'm at, 182 people. So if we have a 5-person or 6-person work crew out there and we have a little bit of funding, we can get a lot done. And we know the elders that don't have the ability to go out and perform defensible space work. So how, again, as that individual and then as a community, are we going to come to a place of agreement with what we need to do and how we need to protect those communities, how we need to put those defensible space dollars to work? And more than anything, I think we need to get the science and the politicians and the tribal communities and all these decision makers, that your opinion leaders, as you would say, together and begin these conversations in a good way before that crisis hits and come up with those solutions. It's going to look different for every community. Sonoma is different than Alturas, California. Ashland is different from Chico. I mean, those are just realities. And all the players are different, but in every community, you're going to find a core group of people that really care about all of this. And it's just like those 6 members in a church that always show up that are the workers. You're going to find your workers, you're going to find your decision makers, and even the people that oppose or disagree with what we think. And that all needs to come together again in that radical middle of where's our common ground, how are we going to protect our communities and homes, and what are the best answers here? How are we going to build those homes? Are they going to be made out of better material that aren't, that's more fire resistant and resilient? Insurance, like we were talking with your folks up there, how are we going to address that and making sure that our communities and individuals are informed, are talking to each other, and that we're following some standardized fundamental protocols of how to be safe.
I think I'm going to, next time I get asked that question, usually by a reporter, I'm just going to give him your number, if that's okay. I'm going to tone down my sort of defensiveness, like, well, where do you want these people to go? Like, maybe we should just pay to mitigate the wildlands around them. But I hear you, and I think that that's an important, I will take that as my lesson for the day, and I appreciate that. So Marko, if you would like to address the conversation what we were talking about a moment ago about living in the WUI, and then I would also like you to, and then I want to go into a conversation about we have this huge challenging problem in front of us, and the wildfire mitigation. And what is needed for organizations like yours to make sure that you are amplified, supported, and expanded throughout the American West? So 2 very small questions.
Well, thank you for that, Jennifer. Thinking about the last question and that Belinda addressed, and I had the opportunity to just ponder on it while she was sharing. Most of the West and, Oregon and Northern California is the WUI. I mean, we're in the WUI. It has a different definition when we think of a real wildland and an urban interface. What defines that? There's also the wildland urban intermix, or the rural wildland intermix, like very rural community like Belinda's mentioning. But I think the key is, when I reflect back to some of the elders from our tribal partners that spent a lot of time visiting with Lomakatsi in the early days of our formation, sharing this model of these village sites, and they've been mapped out and they've been there for thousands of years. They were put in position, they were put in places on the landscape where fire intensity was thought about. There was a thinking around mitigating fire, because we're living in a dynamic, fire dependent and fire adapted system. This is what shaped this place. it's going to continue to shape this place. So, you know, we could do a better job on planning and thinking about, you know, using the science on how fire burns, where it burns historically, how it's moved across the landscape, and places we might want to, you know, have more creative thinking around where we build. But in a sense, we're all in the WUI. I'm in the WUI. I own a home in the WUI. And I'm out every morning right now, you know, and we do this across thousands of acres. I'm out every morning at 5:30 doing my own mitigation around my home. It's kind of like an auto mechanic that never works on their own vehicle because they're too busy working on everybody else's. So I think there's a way to balance it. And we have to get really creative about how we address the fire issue in the wildland-urban interface, continue to do the work we do, be strategic about our treatments, our dollars when they're invested. And, you know, these fires aren't going to go away, and people are going to continue to build in the WUI. They're going to continue to maintain their homes in the WUI. So let's do the good mitigation work around those homes. Those are, you know, community members. And let's think creatively, like that place-based model that Belinda talked about. That is the model, traditional ecological knowledge, people learning to live with fire, people learning to apply fire, and actually taking care of their home site defensible space and their greater strategic areas that we're going to ameliorate fire. We need their investment, we need their support for, you know, not just to benefit themselves, but the whole community. Now, the issue we run into, to your second question, is we have millions of dollars through these various federal and state programs, and they're going to continue to flow. The challenge with organizations like Lomakatsi and non-government organizations is with every large infusion of dollars to get these thousands of acres treated, there's all this administrative and programmatic and operational overhead capacity needed. So leaning on our philanthropic partners, just the ability to support that capacity is going to go a long way to our mitigation and restoration work. We're really good at raising dollars and putting money on the ground and doing it efficiently. The girding we all need as non-government charitable organizations is just supporting our administrative and programmatic team, that we could actually expand that team so we can do more of this work. And that's the challenge with the funding is, you know, even you get your indirect costs paid for, and I don't want to get into the weeds about all the semantics of this, but that's the kind of help we need as non-government organizations, is to support our team. That's you know, packaging these and really to support our work with our tribal communities and our Latinx communities. Those are the communities that need our support in this fire recovery work. They are the marginalized communities, and they have a lot of solutions, and those are the people doing the work on the ground. They're doing the creative thinking, they're doing the strategic thinking. So that's the programs we're after.
And I think most people who are listening to this, you know, some of them are in disaster and some may not be aware that the reality is that if you want to even be an administrator for, like, we have a federal grant. We had to make sure that we matched it. We could demonstrate an equal match of resources in order to administer this federal grant for fuel mitigation. We have a CAL FIRE grant for $1.5 million, but it required our organization to isolate and commit $200,000 of our own funds in order to do that. And we believe that, to abuse a cliche, there should be skin in the game. But at a certain point, these matches are not feasible, and they don't actually fund the implementers who are doing it very well. They just don't, and they don't fund for talent. You know, we have no issue funding for talent in the private sector or non-governmental sector, except when it comes to nonprofits, which are the only ones really besides tribal nations who can even do this work or receive those funds. So there, it's kind of strange, because you're not supposed to pay staff if you run a nonprofit, but you actually can't run a successful nonprofit unless you can pay your staff. And places that have the least amount of resources that need a tremendous amount of fuel mitigation, counties that are not well resourced should not be required to do matches for those grants. They can't do it. They need the capacity to even apply for them. And there needs to be a common app across all of the major agencies too. Like, there are things that can be done, and I actually have a lot of hope, more so than I did even 2 or 3 years ago, that will come to the fore. But I don't know if people really realize that navigating the federal or any kind of public funds really is very skewed systemically towards counties and states that have a ton of money, and skewed systemically against counties and states that don't.
That's really good, Jennifer, because that's what we see. We work across 2 states, over 15 counties, and it's really different everywhere you go. The demographics, the conditions. But you brought up a good point that a lot of our funding has to be matched. It has to be non-federally matched, or in the case of state dollars, we have to bring additional private funds to receive those dollars. So that is a big part of what we're hustling day to day to do, is to leverage these dollars, to layer. We were looking at one of our projects today, and we have like 15 funding sources to make this project whole and make it work. From federal money, tribal 93-638 self-determination funds, to state dollars, to multiple private foundations, to get this project off the ground and to leverage and layer this all together. It's a huge amount of work. So the support is really needed in the development and the forecasting. So if you're going to envision a project, where are the dollars coming from for the first 2 years? You're going to have to assemble that project, like we just did on an amazing project, the West Bear All Lands Restoration Project, that we're receiving some significant funds. We're creatively using private philanthropic funds from one of our partners, Sustainable Northwest. We're bringing additional private dollars through Lomakatsi, and we're leveraging FEMA funding through the mitigation grant program. We're utilizing NRCS dollars through the Regional Conservation Partnership Program. We're leveraging Oregon Department of Forestry funds. We're bringing in some tribal dollars, and then small private foundations. So you have 15 grant agreements or awards for one project. That's a pretty large project, 27,000 acre area. We'll treat about 6,000 of those acres with the funds in-house. But then who's going to administer those funds? Who's going to have to report on all those grants? Who's going to have to oversee accountability on the financial end? That's the staffing and the support we're going to need in order to do this fire mitigation work. We have the skills, the boots on the ground. We have capacity with our service providers. We have great technical staff, programmatic leaders, but we need that undergirding to keep ourselves whole to operate these great programs. It's really a challenging game to be in.
It's really challenging, and you're not trying to like buy a Lamborghini with this. This is not, none of us are in this thinking we're going to come out of it millionaires. That's not it at all. We're just saying that we need just some changes that make this, like, 27,000 acres is really impressive, and it's just a tiny bit. Like 10 million acres burned just last year in 2020, and we don't even know what we're up against this year. So in that sort of war mentality of how do you, like during World War II, we paid in America for childcare for every woman so that she could go to work. And now it's something that we don't do, but we had to think creatively in order to get through that period of time. And we really do need that. We're not limited by capacity or creativity or willingness, but we are often, well, sometimes we're limited by willingness, but I think last year may have blown that up. But we are very limited by how to actually staff it, So right. I appreciate you bringing that up. Like, it really is it's a huge issue.
So one of the comments, Jennifer, I just realized when I said it's challenging, I'm not pouting.
I don't think you are.
This is what gets folks like us out of bed in the morning. And we're making a living, not a killing at this work. The people that we work with, we're passionate about it. We care about it. But I wanted to share one quick story. There was a fire that happened in April, late April, in one of the areas we've worked. It's within the Klamath Reservation Forest, the Fremont-Wainema National Forest, a town called Bly, Oregon. It's pretty rural, but we implemented a project with a tribal workforce and in partnership with the Klamath tribes several years back. And that fire was a human caused fire, and it burned. They had all their resources on it. It was very early pre-fire season, but it was dry. And the areas that weren't treated burned really high intensity, stand replacing, or scorched a lot of big trees. And the area that we treated, we thinned it, we commercially, ecologically thinned it using local operators. We did an A to Z project, meaning we did all the marking, the prescription, we did a whole training around it. And then we burned the slash, and then we underburned. That fire came back into that stand, and it stayed completely on the ground. It burned at low intensity. All the pine are still there. And we just recently did a community tour of that area through a tribal workforce program. And it was amazing to see the results of the fire next to the area and the fire that had been unburned or burned. And that's what we're looking for. We're looking to set the stage that our communities can be more resilient, our ecosystems can sustain, because we care about these large old trees and the diversity, and that people have good, meaningful paying jobs, good livelihoods, right livelihoods, working in their communities, caring for their land, and caring for their community.
Yeah. Oh no, you don't like to do it. And no one's saying that we don't want to be accountable for the funds that we get. We want public funds to be accountable, and we're just asking for a little more streamlining, a little more sanity, a little more funding, and a little more like realistic approach to doing this work. And so I know that from the first time that I met you, which was in Ashland out by where the fire started, the Almeida fire and the ponds, and we were all out there in a circle with public sector leaders, and I learned the term mild fire to prevent mega fires at that meeting. And I was impressed then by you and Belinda and the work that you're doing. And I felt very fortunate that we happened to have this, mutual connection in Tom Greco, your communications director. So I just want to really say that I'm very happy to have you on this podcast and to amplify what you do. And I'm really hoping that we find points of alignment and opportunities to work together coming over, the next decade many times. So I really think your model is exactly what I would like to see more of everywhere. So Belinda, I think you just heard that I said to Marko that I was very impressed when I was able to meet with where both of you were at the ponds in Ashland, and to hear the work you do, and to have met with you since then. That was a wonderful meeting a few weeks ago. I would really just like to hear from you. How can we be supportive of you? Any closing thoughts about the subjects we've spoken about today, or your hopes as we close out this podcast?
Well, my dream is really having a Western regional coalition. I mean, from the West Coast that comes together and really with one voice, one mind, one accord, provides those solutions to Washington, D.C. So thank you very much for what you've done in response to the events in your area. And we are place-based. The tribes, I think, I know we're place-based, and we have a lot of the solutions. I think being able to, again, thank you for this opportunity to have a voice. And then to really listen to each other, be able to connect, be able to stay fundamentally sound in the protocols, the standardized protocols that we know, and to practice more of the efforts that we need in prevention, mitigation, recovery, response. Oregon just declared a state of emergency. 19 counties are in drought right now. So with that, we will be able to access mutual aid. So it's kind of staying ahead of the curve and being out there, taking the risk, having the courage that you have to do what you do. And we need more of that. We need more of the people who are willing to take the risks in the community, to step maybe outside the box, and like you keep referring to, maybe sometimes that means strange bedfellows. But if we're asking DC to all work together, if we're asking the Department of Homeland Security, Department of Health and Human Services, the USDA, the Department of the Interior, US Army Corps of Engineers, we're asking all of them to work together as a team also. So it really takes a lot of teamwork. And I kind of look at it like sports. I'm a sports mom. And so we have that East-West game going on all the time. I really do believe that the West has the answers, and we need to be able to provide those answers to decision makers, to funders, so that we can go home and put that money to work on the ground, keep people employed, keep communities safe, keep forests resilient, keep the fish and wildlife alive, and keep our children motivated to take care of this earth for those generations that are coming. And we just need more people like you, Jennifer, to help us and to get that word out there. So
that's so funny, because I'm staring at you and I'm like, oh, I love her. I want like thousands more of Belindas. So coming from you, thank you so much. Like, that's actually, in all sincerity, you know, why I get up in the morning is to meet and amplify and work with people like you and Marko. Like that, it's been the most inspiring years of my life to meet people like you and you in you know, specifically in particular. And I'm excited for the future of what we might be able to get done together. And I know that I want to ride, you know, in your car. So thank you for driving. Thank you. And thank you for being on the podcast. All right. And Marko, right back to you for any closing thoughts or anything you want to say to finish out the podcast.
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer. So thank you again, and all your efforts with, you know, Rebuild North Bay and after the fire, this initiative moving forward. And it was good to meet you at post Almeida fire. You know, we were heavily impacted personally, our organization. We had 3 of our 64 staff lose their homes. You know, we were on a weekly finance meeting with our team on Zoom, because we're in the COVID period there. That was really, we were on lockdown basically. But during that meeting, one of our finance team members said, "Oh my God, there's a fire coming up to the back of my house." And this is where the Almeida fire ignition, right around the origin of the fire in Ashland, before it blew north up Bear Creek, and it shifted. And then she said, "I got to go." And as she left, one of our other team members lives in the neighboring town of Talent. And within 10 minutes, he's like, "I think I'm going to have to evacuate." So we were seeing it just on a Zoom call, and then it was happening. And realizing that how vulnerable we are. We've worked in that riparian zone for, you know, decades. And we've done restoration work and reducing blackberries and replanting for the benefit of indigenous fish for salmon. And who would have thought that fire would have burned the way it did and ignited communities, wind-driven, and moved through that, you know, from Ashland all the way into Medford the way it did. So we are seeing, we're in an unprecedented time of what we're witnessing. And, you know, organizations like yours and the work we're doing at Lomakatsi, we have great partners. Work with the Nature Conservancy, the Southern Oregon Forest Restoration Collaborative, the Forest Service, the BLM, our many tribal partners. And we're living and breathing this stuff on a day-to-day. And I think these are the solutions. These are the conversations we need to have. And we've inherited a really intense impact from years of mismanagement. We're not here to do the blame game. It's to say, you know, to own what we've done as a society, and then to find solutions, to be solution focused. I think that's where we're coming to. And it does cross the aisle. When I testified in 2019 on wildfire resilient communities to Deb Howland's subcommittee, and we were there with Forest Service and some other expert witnesses, the aisles came together right in that meeting. There was agreement that we actually do need to do this good mitigation work. And yet it does need to be ecological, so it could be supported by all of our partners. So I see it happening. You know, the media might not portray that. It might portray polarization. And I know you and your work, you find those moments where something really special shows up. And, you know, whatever we're going to define that as, where people talking from different perspectives. and they're coming up with solutions. And you feel that synergy and that energy in the room. That's the point we're at now. We don't have the time to be in constant debate. We have to find those solutions. And I'm excited to be part of this time, even though it's a difficult time on the planet. It's a very exciting time. And I think we're going to set the stage for a future that's going to be brighter. And so thank you for this opportunity. And I'll just share one more quick thing. Our crews, so we have an interesting model at Lomakatsi. Our crew spent the whole summer on fire, even down in California. They were on many incidents, starting in June all the way to the end of October. And when they came back, post-fire recovery for Alameda Fire, Jackson County Office of Emergency Management, we got to get some stabilization along this creek because we have salmon coming up. We have sedimentation issues. So that crew went from a whole season of fuels reduction work from basically October all the way around to October, and then fighting fire all summer, and then right into mitigation. And that's the need we have. We need to have a community workforce, a community team that can respond quickly, be in place, and be able to address these issues. And that's the capacity we need to build across the West and to continue to build with our agency partners, the private sector, our tribal partners, and great NGOs like Rebuild North Bay and our other NGO partners. So thank you for the opportunity to share a little bit. I know we didn't cover everything, but this was great.
It's the opening conversation, and we're here for the long haul. And I don't know if you would use this, but after our fires, we had a couple of nonprofits like the Sonoma Ecology Center and some others who went out and did a lot of waddling. And so I named them at that point first responders for the earth. We have public, we have firefighter, everyone, has a role to play and a lane that they can make a huge difference in, but it's that willingness to collaborate and come together. And it's all of the values that you that you and your organization that you extol are exactly what we want to support and have many more conversations. So I hope this is just the opening one. And if anyone again wants to look more at the programs that you guys do and the amazing work that you've done and your visioning, they are welcome to visit lomakatsi.org. And again, thank you so much for being on the podcast, How to Disaster.
Thank you, Jennifer. And I like that. First responders of the earth. I will use that one now.
It's well earned. It's just true. I love things that are true. So thank you. Thank you for joining us on the podcast, How to Disaster. For more information, please visit our website at afterthefireusa.org. And if you liked this video, please hit subscribe.
Navigating the recovery process after a fire is challenging, particularly with the additional issues caused by COVID-19. Fannie Mae is here to help. If you live in a FEMA-declared disaster area, you can request free assistance from our Disaster Response Network. Fannie Mae, in partnership with Maury Management International's Project Porchlight, launched the Disaster Response Network in 2018. This program uses HUD-approved counselors to offer support. These counselors have been specially trained as disaster coaches. They address the challenges homeowners and renters face when recovering from a disaster. There's no charge for their services. The goal of the Disaster Response Network is to help people return to pre-disaster normal as quickly as possible. Clients are matched with a coach who work with them one-on-one throughout their recovery. In the initial conversation with clients, coaches review the status of the homeowner's recovery process, including current challenges, decisions that need to be made, and immediate long-term goals. They discuss topics like income and expenses, insurance, housing, credit or debt challenges, as well as aid or other assistance programs that may be available. This may include FEMA applications and Small Business Administration or SBA loans. The coach helps the client plan and prioritize the next steps for their recovery. Moving forward, the coach continues to be there for the client, reaching out to them regularly, at least monthly, but more often when needed, for up to 18 months' time. These regular check-ins provide the client the opportunity to ask questions, get help tackling challenges, and keep things moving as they work through their recovery. It's also where coaches can help identify new recovery assistance or grants that have become available, strategize new next steps for recovery, and talk through difficult decisions or priorities. One of the key ways coaches assist disaster response network clients is by helping intervene when something has gone awry. Coaches will, with the clients on the line, call insurance companies to adjust their claims when costs exceed initial estimates, or call the client's creditors to request payment relief. The disaster response network's approach ensures survivors have a personal financial expert working with them throughout their recovery. By helping minimize the financial impact of a disaster, survivors can recover more quickly. To get confidential disaster relief assistance, call the Disaster Response Network at 877-833-1746. Once again, that is 877-833-1746. Or visit knowyouroptions.com/relief for more information.